So in this episode, we're going to talk about how to add a gallery inside our gallery page. And as you guys can see, I'm actually inside my gallery right now, and we don't have anything inside our section. So if we go into our code inside our website here, I do actually have all my subpages open here from the last episode. So let's actually go to the gallery.html page and just kind of close down all the other ones, since we don't really need them right now. So inside my gallery page, I'm going to go ahead and go down to my section where we did actually create a div box in the last episode called class gallery dash box. So we're going to go ahead and use this one to put in our gallery. Now inside this div box, I would like to add a wrapper as well. So I'm going to open up another div, and then I'm going to go ahead and give it a class equal to quotation marks wrapper. So now all our images inside our gallery will actually be within this wrapper, so they don't go all the way to the left and right side of the screen. So now we can actually start adding images. Now, depending on what you want to do in the gallery, because you could do it in a couple of different ways. The way I'm going to recommend you guys to do is to not just insert images one after each other, because let's say you want to do some kind of hover effect on it. Like I did actually have a guy asking me inside my YouTube channel, what if you want to hover your cursor on top of a gallery image and you want it to increase, like you want it to pop out a little bit and increase in size once you hover on it? Now, in order to do that, we're going to have to set it up in a specific way. And this is a certain way I would like to recommend you guys to set it up every single time. So let's just go ahead and take it from here. Inside the wrapper, we're going to go ahead and create the first image. And we're going to do that by creating a div box. So inside this div, or at least we're going to name this class, or like name this div box a class by saying class equal to quotation marks. Then we're going to set this one to img-single. So now we're saying that this is a single image. Now inside this div, and if you go ahead and move down to the next line, we're going to go ahead and add an image. Now I do actually have an image inside my image folder inside my root folder called cat.jpg. We're just going to go ahead and use that one as well. If you guys want to, you can go ahead and find your own images, or I will actually go ahead and leave a link you guys can download it from in the description of this video. So in here, we can actually go ahead and say image and open up the code. Well, I have a quick function here. You guys should write image space source equal to quotation marks. And then we're going to go ahead and add, just going to zoom in for you guys. Then we're going to go ahead and add an image in here. So right now I have a folder inside my root folder called image \, and then I need to tell it what kind of image I want to paste in there. So I'm going to go ahead and say cat.jpg. Save it. And right now, if we go ahead and take a look at our browser, you guys will notice we have a cat image. Now, right now, I would like for my cat image to, well, right now our div box is actually adjusting to the size of the cat image. And I would like for the cat image to adjust to the size of the div box. So going into my code again, if we go into the style sheet, which I have right here, right below our footer, I guess, we're going to go ahead and add some code for the gallery. Just going to go down a few lines so we can see what's going on. And down here, I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, so we have a class called image dash, what is it called? Image dash single. I'm not quite sure what we did actually call it. Let me just go ahead and check. Image dash single. Then we're going to open up the code. And in here, we're going to go ahead and give it a certain width and a height. Now, my cat image right now, it's actually a certain width and height. So if I actually go ahead and look at the properties of it, I can see that it is 173 times 120 pixels. So we're going to say width 173 pixels, and the height is 120. Now, we could also do it in another way, since we will essentially be adjusting this. Actually, let's go ahead and do this another way. Let's go ahead and take a look at our wrapper for a second, which is all the way at the top of our code. And you guys will actually see that right now it's 960 pixels wide. Now, depending on how many images I want in here, let's actually go ahead and calculate that. So if I want, let's say, 8 images going across, and the next line there's 8 more images, then I actually need to get a calculator to calculate exactly how many pixels wide my image needs to be if I want, let's say, 5 or 10 pixels margin in between each image. So if we take a look at our website, actually let's go ahead and paste in our image a few more times. So let's say we take our div called image single, and paste it below 8 times. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Refresh my browser, and you guys will notice we have 8 cat images. Now, if I actually go ahead and go into my style sheet, go down to the bottom again, where we have our styling for the image single, I'm going to go ahead and say float left, so we can actually see them next to each other. Save it, refresh my browser, and you guys will notice they're next to each other. Now, of course, our footer will actually go up here, and we did actually talk about that a couple of times, that once we do have floating elements inside a div box, the next div box underneath it won't recognize the floating elements because our current div box can't actually see the size of it. So in order to fix that, we need to go into our image single. Underneath our float, we're going to say overflow, hidden. And now it will actually recognize... Okay, it does actually not recognize it. We need to recognize it by... Oh, of course. We don't actually add the overflow hidden to the image single. We need to actually add it to our div box around our image single, which is inside our gallery. So if we take our gallery box, which is what it's called. So if we take our gallery box in here and copy it, create a class, paste it on top of here, and add the overflow hidden to this one, like so. Just copy it up there, and we might as well delete it from below here. Save it, refresh our browser, and you'll notice that now it does actually recognize the spacing. So what we can do now is say, okay, as you can tell, our images are way too big right now. So if we were to take our calculator right here and start calculating, because we need to do a little bit of math now to actually figure out how wide we need the images to be if we want a certain margin. So right now we want 10 pixels between the cat images, meaning that we want 5 pixels on each side. So we're going to go ahead and say 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and then of course we have the edges, we will be 80. So there's going to be a margin of total of 80 pixels between all the images together. So we're going to say we had a wrapper that was 960 pixels wide. We want to say minus 80, because that's the amount of margin we need to leave space for, equal to 880 divided by 8, because we have 8 images. You'll notice that we get 110. So going back to our code, we can actually say that the width of our image single needs to be 110 in width. Now the height, we might not know right now what it needs to be, but let's just go and keep this one for now. So now what we want to do is we want to style the image itself inside this box. So we're going to go ahead and copy this code, paste it below, and say image-single space image. Then we want to set the width as 100%. So it goes all the way to the edge of our image single. And then we want to set the height to 100% as well. Save it. And now let's go ahead and, well, let's go and delete the float left because we don't need that part. Now if we go ahead and save the website and we go and refresh it, you guys will notice that the image is actually adjusting to our div box, which is what we wanted. Now the height right now does not look like it should. So let's go back into the code and adjust the height a little bit. So instead of 120 pixels, let's go ahead and say 90 and see if that looks okay. Refresh, and that looks somewhat okay. It's still a little bit too much, so let's go ahead and use 80. Like so. I think that looks quite nice. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and add, well, we should probably add a padding to our gallery box, because right now our footer is touching the images and it's actually touching the header. So let's go into our gallery box and say padding, not left, but just padding. And then say we're going to give it a padding from top and bottom. We're going to give it 80 pixels, space, and then 0 pixels from left and right. Like so. Refresh, and you guys will notice we got some spacing now. So now we did actually leave spacing for each image to have 10 pixels between each image and then 5 on the side. So going into our code, we're going to go down to our image single class down here, and we're going to say margin. Then we're going to say from top and bottom, we want a, well, we should probably have a 10 pixels margin, since we do want them to not touch each other below each other once we do actually get another row of images. So we're going to say 10 pixels, and left and right, we're going to say 5 pixels. Save it. So now if I go and refresh, you guys will notice that we get the spacing we want. And it's actually going all the way to the edge here on each side, except for 5 pixels, which is a very small amount that we don't really notice. But if you want to add, what do you call it? If you don't want to have spacing on each side of the row, then we're actually going to have to do the coding a little bit differently, which we'll talk about in another episode in the future. So right now, this is how we have it. And what we can do now is we can actually go ahead and add another row of images inside our gallery page, so I can actually show you guys what we've done here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy the entire row here. And I'm just going to go ahead and go twice down, so I can actually see the differences between the rows. And then I'm pasting all of them in once more. So if I refresh my browser now, you'll see that we do actually get some spacing. Now, we should probably not have set 10 pixels because it's 10 from top and bottom. So going back to our style sheet, let's go ahead and say 5 pixels from top and bottom inside the margin instead. And now we have something that looks somewhat good. So now what we can do is we can actually go ahead and go and add a hover effect. So once I hover on the image, it'll actually increase in size a little bit. So what we can do now is we can go inside our style sheet, and then we need to add some coding to each of these, which you guys haven't seen before, which allows for us to actually move around these things we have in here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and zoom out a little bit so we can see more. Now, we're gonna add some styling to our image single and our image single image, which is called position. Now the position element that we're going to add inside the styling is going to do something specific to the element. If I were to go inside my image single and add position and set it to something called relative, what we're essentially doing now is saying, okay, relative to where the image, or like the image that single is right now, where do I want to move it? So if I were to add top 30 pixels, save it, refresh my browser, you guys will notice that our images will move 30 pixels from the top relatively to where they are right now, like so. That's what position relative does. And we can actually go ahead and say, we can say top, left, right, bottom, and it'll actually move around. But position relative is not something you want to use frequently, you know, instead of margin or something like that. Because if I were to set this one to 230 pixels, now, using position relative or any kind of position element will actually take our object and put it on a separate layer, meaning that right now, all the other elements on our website doesn't recognize that these things are getting moved around. So if I were to refresh my browser, you guys will notice that our footer doesn't adjust to our images. That's because it doesn't recognize the images because we're using position to move it around. So a little tip for you guys, don't use positioning to move stuff around unless you have a really good reason to actually doing so. Now, we don't actually need to add a top or bottom or left or right to the positioning. We do need to have the position relative inside our image single, and I'll explain to you guys in a few minutes why we need to have that in there. So down inside our image inside image single, let me actually go ahead and refresh the browser. There we go. Inside my image single image down here, we're going to add another kind of position. This one is called absolute. And what this one does is that it does actually go in and say, okay, if we're inside some kind of box, I would like for it to go all the way to the edge and then just kind of sit there. So right now, if I were to save this and actually delete my position relative up from our image single, refresh my browser, you guys will notice that, oh, the image is actually just as big as our window inside our browser, and it's going all the way, you know, from where it starts till the edge of the screen, or like further past the edge of the screen, because it needs to go all the way to the width of the browser. So it kind of messes it up right now. But if we go in and add the position relative to the image it's inside of, it's actually going to recognize the div box it's inside of and see where the borders of that box is. So if I go refresh my browser now, it's actually stretching all the way to the edges of this box we're inside of. Now, the reason we need to do that is because, well, you might be asking, why do we do this? We have a width and a height as 100%. Isn't it already going from the edges of the box it's inside of? Well, yeah, it is. But once we want to add a hover effect to make this zoom in a little bit when we hover on top of the image, we will actually need to add this position element to it. So down here, what we're going to say is we're going to say position absolute. Then underneath that, we're going to say from the top, it's going to be 0 pixels. From the right, it's going to be 0 pixels. From the bottom, it's going to be 0 pixels. From the left, it's going to be 0 pixels. Now, you might be asking why we're doing this, and in a few seconds when we do actually get to the hover effects, I'll actually show you guys what exactly this is doing. So what we can do now is underneath here, we can actually start adding some hover effects. So let's say that once I do actually hover on top of my image dash single, so let's go ahead and actually just copy this below here. Once I hover on it by adding the hover effect, I wanted to do this. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and say, well, I would like for it to have a set index, which we haven't talked about before, I think. Now, essentially what set index does is that it takes this element, and like I said before, elements can have different layers inside the website. So if I have a set index, like let's say this image here has a set index of 1,000, and I have another element right below it that has a set index of 5,000, then the element below inside the HTML sheet will actually be on top because it's on a layer that's higher up than this element, which only has 1,000. So set index essentially tells the object, you know, how far in front of the screen it needs to be. So right now, having a set index of 1,000 is more than the default, which is essentially just 0. So right now, when I hover on this element, it's always going to be in front. So we want that. So once we've added this, we actually don't need to add anything else. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy our image-single code, paste it below here, and say once I hover on top of this image, I would like it to do this. So what we can do here is we can actually go ahead and say we would like the width to be 110%. So now we're actually extending it outside the box. But if we do this and I save it, refresh my browser, you guys will notice that it actually kind of pops over to the left or to the right side, and we want it to be centered. So in order to do that, that's why we added our position absolute, because now we can actually say that from our top and from the left side. Let's actually go ahead and go down here. From the top and from the left side, we would like it to be minus a certain amount. So now we can actually say minus, if I can find my minus on my keyboard, minus 10%. And I'm going to go ahead and do that as well for my left. We don't actually need right and bottom. I don't know why we added that in there. Top and left is going to be minus 10% once I hover on it. So if I refresh my browser now, you'll notice, oh, that was actually too much. We need not 10%, we need 5%. Like so. Refresh, and you guys will notice it's actually centered. Now, if I go ahead and add more than 10%, and I actually show you guys what the set index did. If I add 20% and change this one down here to 10%, like minus 10%, you'll actually notice that now it's actually getting so big that it's actually going to go outside the other div boxes we have out there, but it will always go on top of them because we have a set index of 1,000, and all of these has the default, which is 0. So it'll always be on top of it. So now what we can do is we can actually go in and add a hover effect on top of these images by adding a transition. So we did actually talk about how to add the transition, so I'm actually just going to go ahead and, well, we do actually need to add this to the image. I'm just going to go ahead and add the short code I have inside my software right here. By adding a transition to all elements, I'm setting it to, let's go ahead and set it to 200 milliseconds. I'm going to go ahead and set it to ease in, ease out. I'm going to save it, refresh my browser, and you guys will notice we get this little nice effect going on. Right now, if I were to click any of these, they don't do anything. I mean, in purely HTML and CSS, this is all you can do. You can't actually make them do anything other than open up in a new page, which we can actually do right now. So if we go into our gallery, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take the first image we had, and I'm going to go ahead and add an anchor tag on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I close it after the div and open it before the div. Now we also need to add something else in here, which is we need to actually add the path to our image because it needs to actually open up the image. So we don't actually add a path to a certain page. We do actually add the path to the image. So if I save this, refresh, click on the image, you'll notice that we do actually open the image in a separate browser. So in order to actually make it do something much more cooler, which would be if we click an image and it actually pops up in the center of the screen, like in a little window you can where you can click next and the previous and close it down and full screen mode and all that cool stuff, we're actually going to need to add something called either Lightbox or FancyBox, which is actually part of JavaScript or jQuery. So that's also another kind of programming language you would actually need to know in order to do this. And for now, we're just not going to do that. I think we'll actually wait till I actually do get a JavaScript and jQuery series going, and then we'll talk about how to do that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you guys next time.